I woke up inside the body of Emily Harper, the most hated heroine in the novel. I had stayed up reading until 2 in the morning, and the first comment was already drifting in front of my eyes before I had even opened them. It said, "If she forgives everyone again this time, I am done reading this book." I knew the cold of marble under my knees before I knew my own name. I knew the smell of lilies and candle wax before I remembered the title of the book. And then everything arrived at once, the way water arrives when a dam breaks, not gently, not in pieces, but all of it, all at once, drowning whatever used to be me. I was Emily Harper, 26 years old, heiress to a fortune that had quietly rotted under other people's hands for a decade. Fiancé to Oliver Blackwood, golden son of one of the oldest families on the East Coast. And in the world I had fallen into, I was not the heroine. I was the obstacle. The convenient fool who existed so the real love story could have something soft to step over on its way to a happy ending. Above my head, where no one else could see them, words floated. Pale, half-transparent, drifting slowly from right to left like messages on some forum only I could read, lingering for a few seconds before dissolving into the air, the way breath fades on a cold window. I did not ask why I could see them. I had read enough strange stories to know that some questions waste time better spent surviving. Some of the comments I noticed early on came from people who clearly had not just read what I had read. They had finished the entire book, every chapter, every ending I had not gotten to yet, and every so often one of them let something slip that belonged to a page I had never turned. I had time to learn the shape of this new life before the first real blow landed. I knew, the way you know the layout of a house you grew up in, that Emily Harper rose at 6, drank her coffee black, signed whatever was placed in front of her, and apologized first in every argument regardless of who had started it. I decided, somewhere in that first quiet hour, that I would keep her schedule and her coffee, and nothing else. The first scene I lived through as Emily Harper happened at a charity ball thrown by the Whitmore Foundation, in a ballroom with ceilings so high the chandeliers looked like they were floating in their own private sky. Thousands of crystal drops catching candlelight from 40 tables below. I was seated correctly, properly, at the head table beside the man I was engaged to marry, my name written in careful calligraphy on a small white card in front of an empty chair that had not stayed empty for long. Oliver leaned toward me about 20 minutes into the first course, smiling the smile he used for photographs, the one that did not reach his eyes. He said, "You understand, don't you, Emily? Sophia is more important for the family's reputation tonight." I looked past him to Sophia Lane, already standing behind my chair, one hand resting lightly on its back the way someone rests a hand on a coat check ticket they expect to be honored without question. She did not look at me. She looked at the seat itself, the way you look at furniture you intend to keep. A comment slid past my vision as I rose without a word. The husband literally puts her in a corner, and she will still thank him for it. I did not thank him. I also did not argue. I picked up my napkin, folded it once along its existing crease, set it down exactly where it had been, and walked to a smaller table near the kitchen doors, the one reserved for junior associates and forgotten cousins. The people too unimportant to matter and too connected to be left off the guest list entirely. I ate a dinner that had gone slightly cold by the time it reached that table. I watched Oliver laugh under the chandeliers with Sophia beside him, his hand resting on the back of her chair, the same gesture I remembered from photographs of the two of us, performed now for a different audience. The second scene took place 3 days later, in the Blackwood family library, a room with dark wood shelves climbing to the ceiling and a smell like old paper and furniture polish that never quite left my clothes for hours afterward. Oliver came in carrying a leather folder and set it on the desk in front of me without explanation, because he never explained things to Emily Harper. He only assigned them, the way you assign a task to a printer. He said, "These need to be finished by tomorrow morning. The board meets at 9. I opened the folder. Quarterly financial statements for one of the family's logistics subsidiaries, riddled with discrepancies that needed smoothing, currency conversions that needed reconciling, language in the executive summary that needed softening so the board would not start asking questions nobody wanted to answer. I spent 4 hours at that desk under a single green banker's lamp, matching columns by hand, rewriting 2 paragraphs so they read as confident instead of evasive, checking my own work twice because I understood, even then, that mistakes belonging to Emily Harper had nowhere safe to land. When I finished, Oliver came back in, glanced over the pages for perhaps 90 seconds, and signed his own name at the bottom of every one in the same blue ink he used for everything. A fountain pen his grandfather had supposedly carried through 3 decades of board meetings. A comment floated above the page as I watched the ink dry, dark and slightly raised against the white paper. Free secretary with a fiancé's title attached. I closed the folder and handed it to him. He thanked me the way you thank a printer for not jamming, already turning toward the door before the second syllable of the word finished leaving his mouth. The third scene was the one that, according to the comments, the readers had been waiting for since Chapter 1. It happened at the Blackwood family's autumn reception, the kind of event with 40 round tables, a string quartet tucked into a corner, and enough champagne moving through the room to fill a small swimming pool. Oliver stood at the center of it, near the dance floor, in front of nearly 200 guests, and presented Sophia with a small velvet box. Inside it was a sapphire bracelet. Deep blue stones set in white gold, the clasp shaped like an unfurled wing, small enough to look delicate and old enough to mean something more than its size suggested. I recognized it instantly, because 11 months earlier, in this same family, in front of far fewer witnesses, Oliver had told me that bracelet would one day be mine. A Blackwood tradition, he had said, passed down to the woman who would carry the family name forward. He had said it while fastening a different, smaller piece around my wrist as a kind of promise, a placeholder for the real thing. Now he fastened the real thing onto Sophia's wrist himself, in front of everyone, while I stood near the dessert table holding a small plate of food I had no intention of eating. I heard laughter ripple across the nearest tables. Not loud, not especially cruel on its own, just the easy, comfortable laughter of people who already knew exactly how this story was supposed to end and were enjoying watching it arrive there precisely on schedule, like a train pulling into a station everyone had been told about in advance. A comment appeared in front of my eyes, slower than the others, as though it understood exactly how much weight it was carrying. She is not staying after this, right? I did not cry. I did not throw the plate. I set it down on the white tablecloth with more care than the moment deserved, walked to the cloakroom, asked for my coat, and went home alone in a car that Oliver had not bothered to notice I had taken until I was already 3 streets away. The bracelet meant something specific in the novel I remembered, something I had read about in chapter after chapter without ever truly understanding it the way I understood it now, standing in Emily Harper's shoes under that same chandelier light. It was never really a gift. It was a measurement of how much was left over after everyone else had already taken what they wanted first, and of how willingly the woman receiving the leftovers was expected to call it generosity. The turn came 11 days later, on a Tuesday, at 11:15 at night, in a part of the house that had never once felt like mine even though my name appeared on the deed. I had gone to Oliver's study to drop off a stack of documents he had asked me to organize that afternoon, documents he was too tired, or too important, to deal with himself before bed. The door was unlocked. The desk lamp was still burning, casting a small circle of yellow light across papers he had not bothered to put away. On top of the desk, not hidden, not locked in a drawer, just left there with the careless confidence of a man who had never once imagined I might actually look closely at anything he handed me, sat an open folder. Inside it was a marriage contract. Not the one I remembered signing. The one with the standard language about shared property and prenuptial protections we had discussed once, briefly, over dinner with his family's attorney present. A different one, dated more recently, drafted by a firm I had never heard of, with a clause highlighted in yellow that I read 3 times before I let myself believe what it said. In the event of the death or compromised status of Emily Harper, all assets transfer to the full control of Oliver Blackwood. Compromised status. I sat with those 2 words longer than I sat with anything else in that folder, turning them over, understanding slowly how much room they left for interpretation, and how convenient that room would be for whoever controlled the interpretation. Beside the folder sat a stack of printed messages, Correspondence between Oliver and Sophia going back at least 8 months based on the dates visible on the first page alone. I did not need to read all of them. One line, near the top of the stack, was enough to make the rest unnecessary. It said, just a few more months. She will sign everything herself. A comment drifted across the desk, almost lazy in its timing, the way a comment appears when it already knows it has all the time in the world to land. Oh, she just found the actual plot. I noticed, almost as an afterthought, the wax seal pressed into the corner of the contract, deep red, the Blackwood crest stamped into it with the kind of precision that meant someone had taken real care to make this look official, permanent, inevitable. The kind of seal designed to discourage exactly the sort of close reading I was giving it right now. I closed the folder exactly the way I had found it, squared its edges against the desk, and turned off the lamp on my way out. I did not confront Oliver that night. I did not confront him the next morning either. This is the part of the story where, if I had still been the heroine the novel intended me to be, I would have cried in front of him, demanded an explanation, given him the chance to apologize his way back into my good graces one more time. The way the original Emily Harper had done after every prior chapter's small betrayal. The comments had hinted, in their own scattered way, that this pattern had repeated itself for far longer than 11 months. I decided, somewhere on the walk back to my own room, that it would not repeat again, and that Oliver would not get the satisfaction of watching me decide it out loud. I stopped fighting Oliver in any way he could see. The comments became something closer to a map than a curiosity once I let myself actually use them instead of simply reacting to them. They were not always kind. They were not always right. But they came from people who had read the entire book I was now living inside of, page by page, twist by twist, some of them remembering details I had only skimmed at 2 in the morning, half asleep, 3 months before I ever expected to wake up living any of it. One comment told me, 2 chapters from now, that lawyer becomes an ally. I had no idea which lawyer until a name appeared on my own calendar the following week, slotted in by an assistant who had no memory of scheduling it. Daniel Morgan, recommended through a contact at the bank that handled my mother's old trust, a trust Oliver had quietly stopped mentioning sometime after our engagement was announced, the way a person stops mentioning a door they have already locked. Another comment, a few days later, said simply, "Do not cancel the meeting in Boston." I had been about to cancel it. Oliver had asked me to stay home that weekend to help host a dinner for one of his investors, the kind of dinner where I was expected to seat people correctly and disappear into the background otherwise. I told him I had a prior commitment regarding my mother's estate, which was, technically, true. I drove to Boston myself. I met Daniel Morgan in a small conference room on the 14th floor of a building that smelled like fresh carpet and printer toner, the kind of room with a view of a parking garage instead of a skyline. He had my mother's trust documents spread across the table before I even sat down, sorted into neat stacks with colored tabs marking the pages he wanted me to see first. He said, "Your mother structured this very carefully. Whoever has been managing it since her passing has not been doing it the way she intended." I asked him who had been managing it. He turned one page around so I could read the signature at the bottom. Oliver Blackwood, acting on my behalf under a power of attorney I did not remember signing, though my own signature was there, small and slightly rushed. The way it always looked on documents Oliver handed me during one of our endless evenings of paperwork I never had time, or apparently the will, to read carefully. I asked him what my mother had actually built before she died. He told me about Eleanor Harper, my mother in this life, who had started a small textile import business 41 years earlier with a loan from her own father that she repaid in full within 3 years, and who had grown it, slowly and deliberately, into a company worth far more than anyone in the Blackwood family had ever bothered to acknowledge, because acknowledging it would have meant admitting that Emily Harper had brought more to this marriage than her name. He pulled out one more document, a photograph clipped to the front of an old incorporation file, my mother standing in front of a warehouse in 1987, wearing a coat too thin for the weather, smiling at whoever held the camera with an expression I recognized immediately, because I had seen it that same week in my own mirror without knowing what to call it yet. He told me she had written a letter, filed alongside her will, instructing that the company never be folded into any future husband's holdings under any circumstance. Oliver had never shown me that letter. I asked Daniel Morgan why not, and he said, because it would have made his job a great deal harder, and he did not look up from the page while he said it. I did not raise my voice. I asked Daniel Morgan one question. Can it be undone? He said yes, quietly and carefully, and in a way that does not alert anyone until it is already finished. That was the beginning of what I came to think of as the quiet years, though in truth it was less than a single year, just under 10 months of decisions made in rooms Oliver never entered and conversations he never knew had taken place. I moved my own remaining assets, the ones still technically in my name, into an irrevocable trust with Daniel Morgan named as co-trustee, a structure he assured me Oliver's existing power of attorney could not touch once it was properly filed. I restored full control over my mother's company, removing Oliver as a signatory on 3 separate accounts in a single afternoon, a process that took Daniel Morgan and 2 paralegals 4 hours and produced a stack of paperwork 11 inches thick. I purchased a townhouse in London through a holding company registered under a name that meant nothing to anyone who might come looking for Emily Harper, a narrow brick building on a quiet street near Holland Park that I had only ever seen in photographs. Daniel Morgan emailed me one evening with the subject line, "Soft landing, just in case." I began meeting, quietly, with investors the novel's original Emily had always dismissed, men and women who had approached her at events over the years with proposals she had waved away because Oliver always told her business was not her concern. One of them, a woman named Patricia Cole who ran a logistics fund out of Chicago, had tried twice before to discuss a shipping investment with Emily Harper and had been redirected to Oliver's office both times. I took the meeting myself the 3rd time she reached out. Patricia Cole met me for coffee in a small place near Union Square, no assistants, no folders, just 2 cups and a napkin she used to sketch out the rough shape of a deal she had been trying to get in front of someone for over a year. She told me, near the end of that conversation, that she had stopped expecting a response from this family at all, and that she had only tried a 3rd time because a mutual contact mentioned Emily Harper had started answering her own emails. I told her I had started doing a number of things myself lately. She laughed and said that was usually how the good deals found her, when someone finally got tired of letting other people answer for them. Oliver noticed something had changed long before he understood what it was. He noticed I stopped asking him questions before I made decisions. He noticed I stopped crying after the small cruelties that used to make me cry, the missed dinners, the rescheduled plans, the comments about Sophia delivered with a shrug. He noticed that when Sophia wore the sapphire bracelet to a dinner one evening, I looked at it the way you might look at a stain on a tablecloth you intended to deal with later, rather than the way I used to look at it, like a wound being reopened in front of witnesses. He asked me once, almost gently, almost like he missed something in me he could not quite name, "Is everything all right with you?" I told him everything was fine. It was, by then, the most honest thing I had said to him in months. The clearest proof of how far things had shifted came on a Thursday afternoon in March, in a glass-walled conference room on the 31st floor of a building Oliver had never once visited, when I signed the final paperwork to acquire a 52% controlling stake in Castellan Maritime Holdings, a shipping company 3 times the size of anything the Blackwood family had ever owned outright, financed through a combination of my mother's restored company and the London holding company. That, until that moment, existed only as a line item on a spreadsheet. Daniel Morgan slid the closing statement across the table once the wire transfers cleared, the numbers settling into place on the screen behind him. He said, "You understand what this means." I understood exactly what it meant. On paper, in numbers that existed in databases Oliver had no access to and no reason to check, I was now, quietly, substantially wealthier than the entire Blackwood family combined, a fact that would remain invisible to him for another 4 months. Oliver did not know. He still believed I came home from Boston that day to handle, in his own words, a small matter regarding my mother's old business. A comment appeared above the closing statement as I signed the last page. "He thinks he is running the plot. That is cute." I kept the signed contract in a navy folder with gold lettering pressed into the cover, and I kept that folder in a safety deposit box at a bank 3 blocks from my mother's old offices, registered under a name Oliver had never heard. Accessible by a key that lived, from that day forward, on a chain around my neck, beneath my collar, where no one would ever think to look for it. The night everything came apart in public was the night of the Whitmore Foundation's annual benefit gala, the same foundation whose ballroom had once held the table I was moved away from in the opening of this story. Held that year in the grand ballroom of a hotel on Fifth Avenue, the kind of room with gold leaf ceilings and a string section tucked discreetly behind a curtain of white roses, set up that night for the largest crowd the foundation had drawn in years. 300 people filled that ballroom. Business partners who had known the Blackwood name for decades. Members of the press, cameras already mounted on tripods near the stage, lenses pointed at the empty podium like they already knew something worth filming was coming. Old families whose ancestors had built half the buildings in that part of the city. And the full board of directors of Blackwood Holdings, seated at a table positioned, deliberately, where everyone in the room could see them nodding along with whatever Oliver was about to say. Oliver had told me, 2 days earlier, that he intended to announce our wedding date that night. I had heard him through the door of his study, rehearsing the line about how patient I had been, how grateful he was for my support these last few years. Practicing the warmth in his own voice the way an actor practices a line he does not believe, but needs to deliver convincingly. When the moment came, when the room had quieted and the lights dimmed slightly and Oliver stepped toward the small stage at the front of the ballroom, adjusting his cufflinks the way he always did before speaking to a crowd, I stood up first. I did not raise my voice. I walked to the front of the room, took the small clip-on microphone from the stunned event coordinator standing near the stage steps, and said, "Before any of this continues, there is something the board should see." The screen behind the stage, the one set up to display the foundation's annual donor highlights, switched instead to a series of documents Daniel Morgan and I had prepared months in advance. Ready and waiting on a drive he had carried in his jacket pocket every single day since February, in case the right moment ever arrived. The marriage contract appeared first, the clause about compromised status highlighted exactly as I had found it that night in Oliver's study. Then came the financial transfers, the ones moving money out of my mother's trust and into accounts connected to Sophia Lane over a period of nearly 2 years, the totals displayed in plain figures that needed no explanation. Then came the messages between Oliver and Sophia, the ones about just a few more months, about her signing everything herself, projected large enough that the back rows of the room did not need to lean forward to read them. Then came the documents detailing the attempted seizure of my inheritance, filed under a power of attorney obtained, according to the notarized statement displayed beside it, through a signature that had never been properly witnessed. The room went silent the way rooms only go silent when several hundred people simultaneously decide it would be rude to make any noise at all. Charles Whitfield, a board member who had known Oliver since he was a boy, stood up and walked out without a word, his chair scraping against the floor in the otherwise complete quiet. Another director, a woman near the front whose name I never learned, set down her champagne glass on the table so carefully it barely made a sound, then folded her hands in her lap and did not pick the glass back up for the rest of the evening. A third man at the board table, someone I recognized only because Oliver had once pointed him out as the chairman of the foundation itself, took off his glasses, cleaned them slowly with the corner of his napkin, and put them back on before looking at the screen again, as though he hoped the documents might read differently the second time. They did not. Journalists who had come expecting to photograph a wedding announcement instead pointed their cameras at the screen, capturing every document, every date, every signature. The shutters clicking in a rhythm that filled the silence Oliver had stopped trying to fill himself. Above the chaos, the comments came faster than I had ever seen them move, stacking on top of each other, overlapping, almost frantic in a way that matched the room. Finally, this is the better version of the book. The author should have written it this way. Daniel Morgan stood near the edge of the room throughout the entire thing, hands in his pockets, saying nothing, asking for nothing. He had told me, weeks earlier, when I asked him why he was helping me with no fee attached and no personal stake in the outcome, that some things did not need a transaction behind them to be worth doing. He did not step forward to defend me that night. He did not need to. He simply stood there, close enough that anyone looking for someone on Oliver's side near me would find no one, and stayed exactly where he was while the room turned, one director at a time, away from the man they had spent the evening planning to celebrate. The final image displayed on that screen, the one that stayed up the longest while the room absorbed what it had just seen, was a single email, time-stamped clearly in the corner. The date on Oliver's message to Sophia, the one about her signing everything herself, was the day before he had proposed to me on the rooftop terrace of his parents' house, in front of a string of small lights he had paid someone to install that morning. 3 weeks passed before Oliver came to find me. By then, his company's stock had dropped enough that 2 major partners had quietly withdrawn from a shipping deal that, ironically, had once been intended to merge with Castellan Maritime Holdings before anyone on his side realized whose signature now controlled it. His name had appeared in 4 different financial publications, none of them kind, one running a headline that simply listed the totals from the screen that night beside his photograph. The family seat on the Whitmore Foundation board, held by Blackwoods for 3 generations, had been quietly reassigned to someone else's name within a month. He came to my new office on a Tuesday morning, unannounced, in a coat that looked slightly too large on him now, the way clothes look on someone who has lost weight too quickly under stress rather than through any kind of discipline. My assistant told him I had 15 minutes. He sat across from me in a chair that, in another life, used to be reserved for people asking Emily Harper for favors she always granted without question. He said, "We can fix this." I did not answer right away. I let the silence sit exactly as long as it needed to, watching him glance at the window, the desk, the framed shipping manifest on the wall behind me, anywhere but my face. He said it again, quieter. "Emily, we can still fix this. I made mistakes. I know that now." I asked him which mistake he meant, the contract, the trust, or Sophia, because I wanted to hear which one he would name first. He did not answer that question. I reached into the drawer of my desk and took out a small velvet box, the same one, returned to me weeks earlier by Sophia's family lawyer along with a brief, formal letter neither of us had needed to discuss further. I opened it and set the sapphire bracelet on the desk between us, the blue stones catching the light from the window behind me. I said, "I used to think this bracelet was a promise." I said, "Now it just reminds me of when I stopped agreeing to settle for less." I stood up. I did not wait for him to respond. I walked past him, out of my own office, down the hallway, past the assistant who would later tell me, with something close to awe in her voice, that Oliver Blackwood had sat alone at that desk for almost 10 minutes after I left, just looking at the bracelet, before he finally stood up, closed the velvet box, set it down again exactly where I had left it, and let himself out without saying another word to anyone. The last comment appeared that evening, while I stood at the window of my apartment watching the lights come on across the city, one building at a time, the way they always did at that hour. Good ending. She finally became the main character of her own story. After that comment faded, no others ever came. I waited for days, then weeks, certain another would eventually drift across my vision the way they always had, narrating some new small humiliation or some new small victory. None ever did. The story, whatever story I had been living inside of, seemed to understand it had finally finished telling itself. I think about that often now in the quiet that followed. The comments never actually rescued me. Daniel Morgan did not rescue me either, not really, and he would be the first person to tell you that himself. None of them handed me anything I did not earn through 10 months of quiet, deliberate, unglamorous work that involved more spreadsheets and closing statements than confrontations or speeches. What the comments did was simpler than rescue. They showed me, in plain language, floating right in front of my eyes, things I had already known long before I ever woke up inside Emily Harper's life. I had simply never let myself say those things out loud, not even to myself, because saying them meant admitting how much I had allowed, and for how long, and why. The plot did not change the day I fell into that book. It changed the day I stopped performing the role someone else had written for me, scene after scene, smile after smile, leftover after leftover, and started writing my own lines instead. So here is the question I want to leave with you tonight. If you could see, floating right in front of your eyes, exactly what 1,000 strangers thought about every decision you were making in your own life, would that help you change things faster? Or would it just turn you into someone who can no longer make a single choice without checking what everyone else thinks first? Think about that for a second, and then tell me in the comments below what you would have done in Emily's place. If this story kept you watching until the end, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories just like this one.